Good morning, councillors. Good morning, executive, and good morning to those joining us in the digital gallery. It's my privilege to declare the ordinary meeting of Tuesday, 22nd of March open. And in doing so, I again acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet and also that form the footprint across our great region. Pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and continue to congratulate them on their nurture of culture. Councillors, I note a full attendance of councillors today and a full attendance of the executive team. Therefore, there are no apologies at point 3. That brings us to item 4, which is prayers, and I'm delighted this morning to welcome Reverend J. Cook from Uniting Church, who's only recently come into the area to offer prayers for us this morning. Reverend, thank you for taking the time to join us. Formally welcome to the region, and we hand over to you.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you, Mr. Greg Christensen, and thank you so much. And nice to see you. Okay. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31 says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all to the glory of God." Let us pray. Almighty God, thank you for having us here today. You are the King of Kings and the Lord of Rulers. We humbly ask you for your guidance to our community, Scenic Ring. Bless Mr. Greg Christensen, our mayor, and our leaders who honor you and serve you. Today, I am praying for our leaders and people who live in it. Give all of them your knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Help them to know you and honor you. Let them also render justice to our community. Let your righteousness control our lives. Almighty God, shower your blessings on every one of us in this community today and forever. Help us to live in freedom and peace and prosperity. Thank you, Lord. I pray this in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. That's great to have you join us. Thank you for those wonderful prayers. And we understand that being new in the area, you will have a busy agenda. We certainly invite you to continue to participate through the digital gallery today, but also respect that you may need to move on to other activities. I look forward to being able to catch up with you in person again very soon.
Thank you, Mr. Greg. Thank you.
We bid you good day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Councillors, we now move forward to item 5 of today's agenda, which is declaration of prescribed and declarable conflicts of interest by members. So I'm aware of some such declarations, and I will commence with a declaration concerning item 11.4, and in the context of 11.4, I advise that in accordance with the legislation and standing orders, that I may indeed have a declarable conflict of interest with regards to item 11.4, and that conflict arises from the provisions of the applicable legislation concerning the being a referring counsellor for a matter. And I will ask then for the meeting to consider the materiality of that conflict and also the treatment of that conflict. I'll just seek guidance on what other conflicts exist before we return to that. Councillor West.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'm advising Council that I believe I have a potential declarable conflict of interest to item 11.1 on the confidential meeting agenda, and that a close family member of mine is a member of the Mount Alfred Rural Fire Brigade, but not an office bearer or a decision maker. I am declaring this in the interest of transparency and do not believe that a reasonable person could have a perception of bias. However, I will ask my fellow councillors to decide whether I can stay in the room, participate in the discussion and vote.
Thank you. Further declarations? Councillor Swanborough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have declarable conflict of interest in items 11.2, 11.3 and 11.4 as the subject of those three complaints. In accordance with Council's investigation policy, I will remain in the room to make statements and to answer questions. And I won't be voting in that instance. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, any further declarations? If not, return to item 11.4. Councillor Enright, if you would just proceed to manage the consideration of that in accordance with, as I've indicated, the standing orders referred to it as may have, so I'm formally putting that on the table and seeking guidance of the meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. I would ask if any councillors have any questions of the Mayor regarding this conflict. Appears not. So the Mayor has proposed that he may have a conflict. We then need to decide whether we believe that the chamber that he has a conflict, and then if it is decided that he does, then the conditions of his participation in those items. So does anyone have a direction that they would like to lead forward for this one? Councillor West.
Motion, sorry, that the Mayor be able to stay in the room as part of that, as part of item.
Sorry, point of order. Acting Chair, you might seek some guidance, but I think the first step is to decide if there is a conflict, then to decide on the treatment. If there guidance from governance, perhaps.
I guess just and we are experiencing some difficulties today because one of our governance officer is attending via remote. I do believe that the notion around what council is deciding at the moment is whether or not that you are, I think you flagged, you have a conflict of interest. It's now deciding. I don't think it's up to council to decide that conflict, but it's up to them to decide whether they allow you.
Point of order, officer. I used the wording may have a declarable conflict of interest.
Sorry.
And therefore it does require the council especially to determine. And I use that wording specifically out of standing orders. So
yeah,
just to put that protocol in place.
So, Councillor West, would you consider your motion regarding whether there is a conflict initially as step one?
Can I? Yeah, just as discussion, we allowed to have discussion right now?
Yes, seeing that we don't officially have a motion on.
No, that's okay.
Yep.
I actually don't think that just because someone makes a complaint means that it's a conflict of interest, unless it's a complaint that's brought about against them. So I'm moving along the lines that there'll be no conflict of interest from the Mayor just because he makes a complaint that isn't a personal complaint against a councillor. So that's my way of thinking at the moment.
Would anyone else like to provide input into that? If not, Councillor.
Yeah, I disagree. I think we should be having questions for a start off. I think acting chair at any rate, but rather than making statements, just a point of order.
Thank you. I did ask for any questions. I didn't get any
so,
takers. So do you have a question, Councillor?
No, I don't actually. But but I was just I didn't want to get the wrath of the chairman. I don't agree with Councillor McConnell. I think if you have got a conflict, if you put I know we can refer ourselves to the OIA, but if someone else has done it, I think there is involvement from a councillor. I think that you do have a conflict in that particular case.
Councillor Enright, I might help expedite this. Given that there's mixed views, I'm actually happy to change my perspective on 11.4 to ensure that there is confidence in the room, and therefore I will move to remove myself for the consideration of item 11.4 and put it as a declarable and trust to the collective wisdom of the room in that regard. Okay, just so that we can move on. Thank you for those comments and thank you for those observations, councillors, but if you're okay with that, Acting Chair, I'll resume the chair on that basis.
Very happy with that. Thank you, Mayor.
Now, Councillor West has made a declaration of a further potential in relation to item 11.1. There are no other councillors with conflicts in relation to that matter. So, Councillor, can we perhaps just seek the clarity to your declaration again, and maybe do that by way of feeding back what I think we understand is that you have a family member who is a member of the brigade but not a member of the executive or the leadership of that brigade, and therefore you've tabled that as the basis for seeking guidance from the room.
That's correct, Mayor.
Okay, councillors, any contribution?
I was just going to move a motion.
Well, any questions for the councillor to further clarify firstly? I think for me, it's fairly clear. So I'm happy to receive a motion firstly about...
I'll move that Councillor West doesn't have a conflict of interest in this instance.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Chalk. Any need to debate? We put the motion, those in favour? Yeah, Councillor, thank you for dealing with that. And the unanimous decision of the room is that you don't have a conflict, therefore there are no other steps to continue in that process. We move now then back to item 6, and it's becoming a bit of a habit to have some announcements, councillors, but I felt it would be remiss not to draw to the attention of the meeting today the announcement yesterday, the finalisation of the beginning, if you like, of the so-called South East Queensland City deal that was signed yesterday, which all councillors should have received a media copy of yesterday. And I believe councillors all were supposed to anyway have received, I was travelling, but a copy of the announcement. For the purposes of the meeting, I just wanted to call out that this is a significant day. The conversation to formulate a city deal approach for collective South East Queensland began before my time in council and will continue, I'm sure, the execution of it over 20 years will continue after my time in council, I strongly suspect. And It's an exciting opportunity because it's actually a process of alignment that actually talks about the process of engagement between the Australian government, Queensland government, and the 11 councils that make up the Council of Mayors to work together in a common commitment that transforms and supports the sustainable development of South East Queensland. I note that there are a number of specific announcements contained in the first tranche of this that was put in place yesterday, and many of those dollar amounts rest outside the region. But there are some components there that are identified about further looking at the investment in the development of the Bromelton State Development Area, which is critical as part of the integration of South East Queensland to see the properly managed distributed industrial development rather than the some of the practices of the past. It also looks to deal with some of the challenges about transport and particularly about freight movement, which constantly constrain the opportunities of South East Queensland and certainly affect our region. And at the risk of mentioning the war, I'll reference something like the Mount Lindsay Highway, and we saw even just in the recent flood events the challenges with it being disrupted so easily and quickly and the impacts that that can cause. There are a number of other opportunities there that are around lifestyle and continuing to ensure a sustainable environment. The details of that have been released in a press release. I would just, for the clarity of the community, whilst this agreement's been announced, it does not in any way pre-commit council to any expenditure. That any expenditure of council will come through proper decision of this chamber for inclusion in future budget processes in the context of this deal. However, it is an exciting moment because it does try to move the strategic thinking about investment for South East Queensland out of an electoral cycle and into a proper planning cycle over a 20-year horizon. Thank you for your indulgence, councillors. I thought it was worth calling that out for the benefit of the meeting this morning. Councillor McInnes, did you have a...
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and it's very apt that you do mention that. And without mentioning the war again, there's a lot of life, there's more than one war going on at a time. And yeah, to the west, and while Bromelton is a great thing for the district, I think there will be and should be plenty of pressure coming for the roads to the west, the Colson crossing and the upgrade of passing lanes on the Ipswich-Boonah Road also, because it's the traffic's getting busier and busier there, and more trucks seem to be coming out of Bromelton to the west, partly because of, no doubt, the state of Mount Lindsay Highway, but it also, anything travelling to the Ipswich area will require upgrade, I believe, in that area as well. So I think it's right that that gets a mention too, and no doubt whether it's this council and other councils will be putting pressure on governments to upgrade those two that I've mentioned.
Thank you, Councillor. I would just, in the context of that, I wholeheartedly agree. And that's why one of the early proposals here, which will be a co-investment opportunity, is around a study that looks at freight and logistics movement. There's been a lot of discussion historically around the movement of commuters and getting people moving around, and that tends to lead to a focus on investment for major urban hubs to connect. And unfortunately, I have often been a sole voice in the room reminding people that most of those people that travel into major hubs can actually telecommute their work. I've yet to see anyone successfully telecommute food or building materials or any of the other produce that's essential to sustaining life. We don't live in the Star Trek world of matter transporters. We actually need to be able to have free and smooth movement of freight, and we actually can demonstrate the challenge that something like the corridors you've discussed, that every time there is a blockage on the Colson, there is a blockage of traffic in any one of our corridors, that it adds high cost to the movement of freight and destroys the efficiency for local businesses to participate fairly in the regional economy. That's why this is an exciting basis, because it says these decisions for the future will be made based on good data that looks at the whole challenge for South East Queensland. But I wholeheartedly agree that there's pretty good evidence, even out of the most recent floods, of the benefit of a number of those corridors receiving urgent attention, and we will continue to push them forward in this process. Thank you, councillors. I will note for that the press release is available on Council's website to talk about that in more detail, along with other materials that are available to support that from the Council of Mayors South East Queensland website that are connected there also. Thank you. We move forward to, we have no deputations that I'm aware of today, and we move to item 8, which is the confirmation of the minutes from the previous meeting. Councillors, we have a brief recommendation on screen, which I shall introduce, that the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 8th of March 2022 be adopted. I seek a mover. Councillor West. I don't believe, I've not been notified of any requests for amendments or additions to those minutes. Councillors, any questions to the minutes? Seek a seconder. Councillor McConnell, thank you. Wish to speak, Councillor?
No, thank you.
Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak additionally? If not, we put the motion as tabled. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Now, I am not aware of any business.
Yeah, just one business arising.
Yes.
Please. Just on 10.1, the council monthly financial report for January 2022, there was just one outstanding question that was taken on notice by the GM People and Strategy, if I could please.
Thanks for your question, Councillor McConnell. And the question was relating to the vacancy rate for the organisation, and you will see it's come up in the and been clarified in the February financial data. Essentially, our vacancy rate at the moment is sitting at about 12.2%, and you will see that employee expenses reflect an underspend against budget of 6%. Of total budget, underspend year to date. What that means, and the difference between those two figures, is essentially that it evidences the fact that we have been supplementing our existing vacancies with both casual employees and contract services to ensure that we can continue to deliver to the services standards that we commit.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Thank you, GM. We move to item 10, and that brings us to the first item before us today, item 10.1, the December budget review. Councillors, that's page 4 of your agendas today, and for those who may be following along on the public available document. GM, we're in your hands.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, councillors and the executive and the public listening into the digital broadcast. 10.1 is the, as the title states, is the December budget review. This has come for consideration to council today following a comprehensive review of the state of operations as at that time, 31st December 2021. Obviously, a lot has occurred since that review and now, which we're busily planning to undertake the March budget review, but focusing at this particular point in time, back in December when reflecting on the budget, As indicated in the comprehensive report attached, Mr. Mayor, it certainly details some of the significant points of interest in there. Notwithstanding, it is a fairly routine budget. It just has allowed for the tidying up of some rat and mice debits and credits associated with some of the grants funding. It highlights the further continuing positive aspects emanating from the macro Scenic Rim financial environment, in that there's still an increased levels of associated revenues from planning, subdivision, operational works, planning applications, property searches, and change of ownership fees, seeing in some increased income in those areas, which sort of portrays, still some of that high level positive impacts associated with the economy. One of the key changes in the December budget review that's contained today is actually for the accountants that are listening in, it's actually a change in a way. The reimbursement of the domestic waste levy by the Queensland government is being recognised. Previously, the reimbursement has been recognised as revenue, and now we've been asked to treat it as contra expenditure offset. So rather than treating it as pure revenue, we're treating it as an offset to the expenditure, or a double negative, which makes it a positive for those fellow accountants out there. On top of that, Mr. Mayor, there has been some recognition of some changes in capital. We've seen capital increase by net increase of about 1.028 million, and again, that's just recognising some of the movements of additional grants and other aspects. It hasn't been an impact in terms of council's bottom line when it comes to cash at bank. I believe the report indicates there that the change has seen an increase in the operating deficit of 32,000, which is immaterial in the general scheme of things. I think that there's some of the key highlights for me. I'm certainly open for some questions prior to for clarification.
Thank you, GA. There's a fair bit in there. Councillors, any points for clarification? Apologies, I didn't have my microphone. I'll restate that, so it would have missed the recording. Councillors, any questions for clarification to the report? If not, I would then just ask if there are any additional comments, perhaps before we then move forward to look at the recommendation. Councillor West.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, on page 11, I just want to mention for those people listening in who perhaps are not accountants, but I believe that budget on a page is a fairly recent inclusion in the quarterly reviews, but it's a very good snapshot of where the situation is at and how we've changed from the previous, like the September review. So it's probably worth the page looking at, I would suggest.
So just to bring clarity to that, that's for those following on in the whole report, that's page 19 of 59, as opposed to page 11 of 29. Just councillors, if we're referring into the main body of the report, please use the numbering of the whole report to avoid confusion. Ask officers to do the same. It helps us greatly to stick with one numbering convention for people to follow on. And so thank you, councillor, but I think for those who went to page 11 of 59, they would have been confused. Page 19 of 59 will be more helpful.
And through you, Chair, thank you for that positive feedback, Councillor West. That's what we try and do with this report. Obviously, council budgets are not too dissimilar to household budgets in revenues and credits, and trying to get understanding on the statutory side when it comes to financial statements, your balance sheets, your comprehensive income does get overwhelming, and what this allows is outlining a ledger, the credits and the debits, and gives you the bottom line impact.
Thank you. I think perhaps proceed and introduce the recommendation, GM.
Deep breath. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation for item 10.1 is that in accordance with sections 169 and 170 in brackets 3 of the Local Government Regulation 2012, Council adopted 2021-2022 December budget review as outlined in the revised statement of comprehensive income for 2021-2022 through 2023-2024 inclusive. 2, revised statement of financial position for 2021-2022 through 2023-2024 inclusive. 3, revised statement of cash flows for 2021 to 2022 through 2023-2024 inclusive. 4, revised statement of changes in equity for 2021 to 2022 through 2023 to 2024 inclusive. And 5, revised relevant measures of financial sustainability.
Thank you, GM. I seek a mover. Councillor Enright. Further questions, councillors? Further discussion? I think just one note in discussion, and whilst this recommendation talks in out years, it's an important reminder that actually we, in budget terms, and when we go on to the current monthly, council can only deal with matters within the current approved financial year, and the rest is indicative and modelling purposes that you see in this report looking into those out years, just to avoid any confusion, which is a disclaimer that I find is necessary from time to time. Apart from that, I think the discussion is, what this highlights is that we're living in a very dynamic world, and the next review is probably going to have some equally entertaining dynamics for us to address, not the least of which being that with the volatility that is around the aftermath of significant disasters, the range of priorities that may well be thrust our way in response to that from state level, potentially federal level, may see us needing to revisit and reprioritise, even within this financial year, other activities. I just put that into the discussion, councillors, and for the community to be aware that obviously there is a lot to consider as we look at recovery. There is a lot to look at as we look at resilience, and those will be matters we need to consider in coming days. Further comment and discussion, otherwise I seek a seconder. Councillor McGuinness, you wish to speak, Councillor?
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly acknowledge the points that you just outlined, and speaking to this motion, I think this is an appropriate way to deal with the ever-changing world that we have experienced in this 2 quarters of this financial year. When we set a budget at the start of a financial year, so when we were going to deliberations of June and July of last year, we certainly weren't aware of what potential impacts there may have been, and I think this is an appropriate step to acknowledge some of those changes. Budgeting is very much a forecast into the future, and who would have known the impacts that both global pandemics and weather impacts could have had in that time. So I acknowledge that these changes that have been outlined in this budget review for December, and thank Oliver and his team for compiling this information and keeping us abreast of the changes as things evolve in the financial world of council.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak additionally? on this? Not. If not, we put the motion as per the multi-part recommendation. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 10.2. Again, GM, we're in your hands. Page 38 of the agenda, councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, item 10.2, as rightly put, is the monthly financial report for February 2022. Just going on the back of those previous discussions around December budget review, obviously this report is the state of play of council finances as at 28th of February. We did see obviously a slight disruption of a few weeks in between there towards the latter part of February. You would recall that we presented or tabled the January-February report only at the previous meeting. Really, the differentiation between the January report and the February report are just some continuing delayance in delivering some of those programs, operational programs. And obviously what we provide in the report is some of the factors that are hindering the delivery of operational and capital aspects. So for the month of February, we're now 8/12 into the financial year. For those, again, for statistical purposes, 66.6 recurring. We see that the net surplus is indicating just a bit over 6 million ahead of budget expectations, and that's made up of operating revenue being $1 million below budget expectations and operating expenditure being $7 million below budget expectation, equating to a net $6 million operating surplus. It's detailed in the report there what those items are made up of, and I think from the General Manager of People and Strategy before outlined some of the employee expenses there. That detail is now contained in this report to give a good indication of that. But we can see that the net employee expenses are only 1.3 of the $7 million. The other materials and services equating to 5.4 million. Over 50% of that relates to expenditure on grant-funded programs of 1.8, along with some economic development programs that continue to be delayed in their delivery of around 881,000. So, and some maintenance and operation expenditure about 1.438. That's underspent in providing the scheduling for those to be undertaken. Part of the March budget review will take all these factors into account to see what is going to be achievable between now and 30th of June, which is just around the corner, to get a better indication to allow for that to be reflected as part of the March budget review. Another question sort of raised at the January meeting, Mr. Mayor, was around some revenue associated with property sales. I can add that figure that's currently in the budget. I'm just getting the page. Oops. It was for land sales, Mr. Mayor, that weren't to do with the Enterprise Business Park. Oops.
You're on page 43 of 59, is that?
That's I'm on page 49 of 59. There's a line in there for property disposal, 775 in the budget. That amount is actually a culmination of 3 years worth of sales rather than 1 year. So that was to reflect that those sales didn't occur in the prior years and they've rolled forward in the current budget. So that's not just a single year sort of expectation. That was more to reflect that the cumulative 2 previous financial years rolled into this to show that they're still on the agenda to sort of be recognised as sales when they do come on for recognition. As I outlined at the opening, Ms. Mayor, there's not much variance in regards to the month of January. I'm happy to take further questions where necessary to provide clarity to the report, Mr. Mayor.
GM, if I could just clarify that last comment about property sales, I refer back to page 43 of 59 where you have some commentary there that carries forward around that property sales. If you could include that clarification about what makes up that figure in there as a reference point for ongoing, I think that would be helpful to maintain that clarity of understanding in our discussions.
Noted. Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, any questions for clarification to the report? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. A question to the GM, perhaps not to a specific item, but perhaps a little holistically as to how the impacts of COVID and weather have on the delivery of projects and also the income from grants. Just perhaps for the benefit of our listeners, how these impacts follow through into our financials.
Thank you, Councillor Enright, for that question. I may rely on input from other GMs in answering that. I guess, just breaking down that question, what these financial reports merely do is a financial representations of those grants. Obviously, as we're successful in being awarded the grant, and the past number of years have indicated there is a strong success rate with council obtaining and being successful in getting a number of external grants to offset some otherwise council expenditure. The purpose of the reports is to reflect those as being receivable, and subsequently as we deliver the programs and report those in the expenditure side of things as materials and services or wages and salaries, then those receivables will then be converted as cash because they're currently sitting as grants and funding revenue. Once we've expended the funds in delivering those programs, part of the funding agreements will necessitate a reimbursement from the funding body to reimburse councils for those funds expended, and then that will convert it from grants and funding into a cash recognition. The impacts associated with delivering those grants as part of the ongoing weather and COVID implications, I may have to rely on GM CRP and GM AES because they hold the lion's share in those programs. Obviously, happy to put that question towards them. Councillor Enright.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. In relation to operational grants, some of the delays have been experienced through the timeframe it's taken to receive the grants and finalise grant funding agreements. So we have seen some complexities around the difference between an announcement and the actual green light to get started. Some of the COVID-related impacts is that a large portion of the projects that we're delivering are requiring community engagement, and face-to-face out and about meetings with the community have proven quite difficult during the last 12, 18 months, even 2 years, to do proper higher level engagement. And to some degree, the Let's Talk Scenic Rim portal that's been put in place is one mitigation of being able to reach the community and get some meaningful input. But there are still some of those projects that require, the ability to get out and have those consultations. And some of it, the delays have been around resourcing and being able to attract some of the specialised expertise that has been identified to assist in the delivery of those projects. So it's not really a one-size-fits-all issue. There's a range of issues that have contributed to some of the delays. But I will say I'm very grateful for the efforts of the team that are trying to now bridge those gaps and complete those projects, and you'll start to see many more of those materialise in the coming months, as some of those will be presented back to council in due course.
GM.
Okay, thank you, councillor, for the question. And from a capital point of view, I can say ditto to that has already been said. Also, it's understanding that probably some of the bigger impacts more recently has been, and also towards the end of last year, was the wet weather. But something I didn't realise would be an impact and actually is impacting some of our project delivery timeframes at the moment is suppliers that were organised to deliver even simple aspects like fencing for security purposes not being available because the suppliers impacted by the recent floods, so which has added weeks of delay to some of our bigger projects as well. That linked with some staff due to COVID protocols not being available. We had a situation last week where we generally run 5 construction crews. We're down to only really filling enough staff to run 3 of those on one particular day due to absences. So that's just the reality that we're faced with at the moment. And certainly I commend the teams for working through these interesting times, and seems to be they resolve one issue and another one appears. So I certainly feel for them and their keenness to get what needs to be delivered for the community, but also understanding that there are those constraints moving forward.
Thank you. Further questions?
No, thank you for those explanations.
Further questions, councillors? Councillor McGuinness.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. To the GM, I draw your attention to page 44 of 59, where we for the last number of months we've had commitments there that we've highlighted so as to give us and the audience a better idea where we are. Have we any idea where those commitments, how far they go out? I know if you look at the line, they're actually above March. I'm not suggesting they'll all be done by March, but that is quite a bit above where it was budgeted for. Is my interpretation of that, or for clarity, where does it? How long do those commitments go out to? And I take it by commitments, we're really meaning that projects have started in some form or other.
Thank you for your question, Councillor McGuinness. Yeah, I guess as a point of explanation, the commitments are at that point in time. So on top of the expenditure, which is that tiny blue column, I guess if you whack the light blue on top of that, that should give you that full forecast. So whilst we've spent that, those commitments are commitments to suppliers and contractors out there, in that there's that same volume of work that's being committed to. So that's for now and towards until the end of the year, or until such time those works have been delivered. So what that means is, there's a purchase order to deliver that volume of work have been issued out to respective suppliers. However, in the details of what those items are, I will a lot of those refer back to the asset environmental sustainability side of things. So I can get Chris to give you further details, but I'll just explain how commitments sort of work.
Look, I don't have the figures at hand, but I can give you some broad ideas. Some of the commitments are just for the month ahead. Others are for entire delivery of a contract that could be for a period of 3 to 6 months. So it varies from a period of a month right through to 3 to 6 months. So the reality of it is that they are committed funds to deliver either a material or service for a period of time, being maybe gravel supply to a road project, or it could be to deliver the full construction of a bridge. So, and associated roadworks. So I don't have the exact breakdown on month by month, and certainly that would add another layer of complexity to officers if they were to work through and actually come up with what that profile may look like. So I don't have the exact breakdown per month, but that certainly is what you see in that number that's there.
Further to that, Councillor, if you refer to page 49 of 59 of the report, from a financial perspective, there is a column there that shows commitments, and it shows the particular areas where those commitments are. You can see that there's about $19.297 million worth of committed orders that indicate, by way of purchase order to those various suppliers in those various categories. So again, as Chris indicated, he mightn't have the monthly breakdowns, but I guess there's some indications there of where those committed orders lay. Hope that provides some clarity somewhat.
Further questions, councillors? Councillor West.
GM, on page 51 of 59, and I noticed that council's expenditure within the scenic rim is somewhat down compared to how it was this time last year. I just wonder if you might elaborate a bit more on that. I'm sure supply is part of the issue, but there are other.
Yeah, this is an ongoing review in terms of what we're doing. I can state that whilst it's not reflected in here, Chris is, with the assistance of Asset Environmental Sustainability, Chris and his team have aided immensely in trying to identify where expenditures with those main contractors, and we've now asked them to report the subcontractors that they engage, so that those subcontractors that are located within the scenic rim are now being captured, and then we can add to this. So it doesn't necessarily reflect here, but from memory, without bogging what the month looks like, but I believe it's been identified about $1.2 million worth of additional expenditure that's been spent on local contractors, but it's actually reflected because that main contractor is situated outside the scenic rim. So once we've down patted that reporting, we'll better reflect it. But yeah, thanks to Chris and his team to assist in getting that, because it is there's a lot of paperwork involved, and obviously at the end of the day, the contractor just needs to be paid, and so that they can pay their subbies, and it's about capturing that extra detail now.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Any additional observations, discussion? Okay, we go to the introduce the recommendation, please, GM.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation for item 10.2 today is that Council receive the unaudited financial statements for the period ended 28th February 2022 for the financial year 2021-2022.
Seeker mover. Councillor McGuinness. Any additional questions, councillors? Any additional discussion? I think just the only additional observation that clearly, as we move over these next few months, we reasonably expect to see some significant changes in both our plans, and therefore reflecting on the timing of things that are sitting in budget, and also that'll show through, as we've previously said, in the next quarterly review. But it will also be something that we need to consider carefully as we reflect on at least the next 6 months of the new financial year as we're planning into budget, that there will be a lot of changes in the environment, both in terms of those supply chain issues, the risk impacts, the other priorities that will come our way that we'll need to reflect upon. No other discussion. Seek a seconder. Councillor McConnell, wish to speak? Councillor McGuinness?
No, that's right. Thanks.
Anyone wish to speak?
Just to thank the staff for their time and effort and explanation here. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak additionally to the motion? If not, we put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? No, that is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 10.3 on page 54. Just for the benefit of the councillors, if you had seen me frowning, I've gone through a total system crash and reboot whilst we've discussed that. I think I'm back in the right place. Page 54.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.3 on page 54 is the financial hardship rates assistance matter. Mr. Mayor, the consideration for this stems from being consistent with the region now experiencing a number of scenarios that have certainly impacted the ongoings of the whole region, but on the positive side, showing the resilience of the region. This matter is consistent with where we've had previous occurrence of those and sought consideration for council in affording some level of assistance to those that may have been directly impacted as a result of the recent weather event. And that's been labelled the South East Queensland flooding 22 February to 7th March 2022. From having my other cap on as the local disaster coordinator, we've seen the various parts of the regions impacted by flooding, but we have seen minimal infrastructure damage when it comes to residents. We've seen a number of roads impacted, obviously, and there's avenues to sort of get those remedied in our disaster funding provisions. However, that's not to say, Mr. Mayor, there has been impacts where in the agricultural sector where we've had notices where they've had particular crops planted and that have been impacted, which may or may not impact certain businesses' cash flow activities. So what this matter seeks consideration today is affording some leeway for those that may have been impacted and can demonstrate that they've been impacted by way of delaying when rates payments are due, not just for the second half levy for this financial year, but also for the upcoming financial year. The report is fairly straightforward and detailed in that nature, Mr. Mayor, and certainly allows for provisioning within the local government regulations to afford such concessions.
Thank you, GM. Councillors, it's certainly not dissimilar to some prior experience we've had, but questions for clarity to this? Councillor McConnell.
Yeah, just to the GM, we've had these in the past with the COVID and the fires. Was there a great take-up of this?
Sorry, I thought you might meant the second part of the question. I guess, Councillor McConnell, I guess the answer to that is no, and I guess that's highlighted in my comment before about the resiliency of the region. However, that's not to say some have applied and some have been granted. So I think, as highlighted in the risk aspect that's associated with the report, is we've seen the various levels of government provide some level of support as per these events, and I guess that the considerations for council whether or not the council offers a similar scenario in regards to impacts to our operating. There is minimal impact. However, sometimes some of these concessions are invaluable to those that actually apply and granted it.
Just a second, if I could, please, Mr. Mayor. In relation to the 5% discount that we usually give for payment within 30 days, will these property owners still be eligible for that with the delay?
Yes, that's what the concession allows for under our rates discount policy. It just extends the due date, which then means that we've seen obviously the second half levy issued and the due date has passed. Some of those people that are continuing to see that impacts and experience, if they can demonstrate that and assess accordingly, what that will do is that will extend that payment, or that they will get that discount up until the 30th of June. And then if they're provided as well, obviously this is a compounding impact, and it may impact their outgoing one, and this allows for then the consideration for the 2022-2023 rates levies, the July and January 23 as well, to extend all those through till 30th of June 2023. So they're able to have the peace of mind that they will have that 5% discount as well. However, as a disclaimer, you have to demonstrate that the impact and associated criteria
Thank you.
Councillor West, were you about to ask a question?
No.
No, thank you.
A comment.
Councillor Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a clarification, if I may, to the GM, and just looking at the criteria, and I know we've used this previously in bushfires and other natural disasters, so I was just looking at what, if any unintended consequences, and one question I have is regarding local business. And if a local business, if the property is within the region, it's a local business, but the owner lives outside the region, would that still qualify?
Yes, the building itself is for the rates here. It's in that instance, it would be eligible because the property itself is domiciled within the scenic rim. It'd be different if you know, that they were trying to apply for a concession if their property was in another locality, and we've got no bounds to offer them any support in that instance.
And just slightly further to that, that if it's a local business but it's a part of another business, it's still considered local, and that would still be entitled to apply for this concession.
To an extent, obviously, yeah, the criteria allows for the evaluation of that, and then to express or to demonstrate what the actual impact is. However, again, yeah, purely just by that business being domiciled within the scenic rim, they would be at early stages eligible, and then they would have to go through the process to see whether they met the criteria in terms of hardship.
Thank you.
Further questions? Councillors, any additional comments to this item? Councillor West, were you looking to make a comment? No? Sorry, right, thank you. I just, obviously, as been alluded to, this is something that we've had versions of around a number of the prior significant events. I think some of the issues raised there, councillors, yes, it may not be a large number of people that take this opportunity up, but the people who take it up, it certainly makes a difference to, would be the observation. If there's no other discussion, I'll ask the GM to introduce the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation for item 10.3 today is that 1, council create a class of ratepayers under section 122 in bracket 1 in bracket B of the Local Government Regulation 2012 for the purposes of enabling a concession to defer the payment of rates for residents and local businesses that were directly impacted as a result of the following natural disaster event. That being South East Queensland flooding 22 February to 7 March 2022. The conditions of the concessions are A, the ratepayer must apply in writing for the concession. B, the ratepayer must satisfy the authorised person assessing the application that physical damage caused by the application by the applicable flooding events has 1, impacted the livability of the residents, or 2, seen the commercial operations directly affected due to physical assets being severely damaged and or lost, or 3, impacted the capability of the land to garner revenue-making opportunities generally associated with the prescribed description that the land is rated for. C, the ratepayer must provide the authorised person with particular information or documents as requested as evidence to support the claim. And D, the class of ratepayers and the concession is a temporary arrangement available only up to 30th of June 2023. And 2, council delegate the Chief Executive Officer as authorised persons to approve the concession.
Seek a mover. Councillor West. Further questions, councillors?
Mayor, I just wonder for clarification in the reference to the South East Queensland flooding, whether the date 22nd of February should have 2022 on there? Is it being a tad pedantic or?
I think a tad pedantic.
That's
I think your self-assessment is accurate, councillor.
through you, Chair. That's actually the what's described under the RFA. So that's their actual definition of that event. So.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions? Any further discussion? Oh, so question, Councillor McGuinness? Or
Yeah, just a question, just for the information for those outside of this room. Just wondering how many actual houses were flooded? Have we got a figure on that?
Through you, Chair, I guess putting my hat on as the local disaster coordinator again, through the assistance of Queensland Fire Emergency Services, QFIS, we have assisted areas that were impacted, and I think from memory there were about 10 residences, and I'm only 9 residences that were directly impacted, but I think there were 10, but only 9 were directly impacted. One required sandbagging, but the water managed to not hit in that area. In terms of other areas, non-residents, I believe, there was a school in Harrisville.
Peak
Crossing, sorry. That may have been inundated with water, the lower level of the library. Lots of properties, obviously we can see remnants of the floodwaters subsiding where debris and whatnot has been left on the fence line, and crops lost, and turf farms with their grass being inundated, causing them to lose that patch or that growth revenue. Hopefully that's it.
Yeah, and probably a comment to follow that up. Well, I agree with the Mayor's comment, even though it's not a big number, those people concerned were affected badly, and I support the resolution.
Thank you, Councillor. And yes, there is a difference between, for the record, we do understand the difference between Peak Crossing and Harrisville, and I'm happy to make sure that we have that accurate in the record, and that certainly that school was affected, and so were a number of other properties in the adjacency there. Okay, any further questions? Any additional discussion to the item? If not, I seek a seconder. Councillor McConnell, wish to speak further? Councillor Lewis, do you wish to speak further?
I do. Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say I do believe this will be very well received by the community, and certainly not only the residents who their homes were impacted, but there was a number of people who, because of infrastructure deteriorations and even flooding issues outside of our area, were not able to get to work. So there was a lot of people who lost incredible amounts of income. So I think this is a very positive move. And just to add, I know in the past we have had the same policy and we haven't had a lot of people take it up, but it's a really nice offer on behalf of council to our community to say this is what we can offer you. So I support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak additionally to the motion? Councillor McConnell.
I'd like to speak additionally, considering the 9 properties were all in Tamborine suburb or Tamborine village. I think it's important that we do provide this and extend it, and as is extended out to 30 June 2023. I know after Debbie it took between 9 and 12 months to actually get back into a residence after it had been flooded and then repaired. So extending it out definitely gives it plenty of time for these people who won't be back in their houses, considering the work for tradies at the moment to be able to come in and fix things up. So I think it's a good motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to speak additionally? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. I would also like to speak for this motion. Certainly acknowledging the impacts on residents and businesses throughout the region, and given the level of assistance that other levels of government are providing or working to provide, I think this is an appropriate level for a council, for a local government to put forward to support those residents and businesses who have been impacted by this flooding event.
Okay. Anyone else? If not, councillors, I will too speak in support of this. And there are multiple aspects of the impact, but perhaps certainly the residential impact we've heard already from Councillor McConnell, but visiting some of the rural properties, as Councillor McGuinness and I did with the state representatives the other day, and understanding the significant loss of direct income. And for some, it's a large piece of their annual income that they'll miss until next year's planting cycle. And the impact to the nutrient levels in soil for some, and the ability to produce for some time. This is a small part of what we can do. In supporting this motion, I would also just note that there is obviously a lot for us to do on our network, but there are also a lot more focuses at state and federal level now about what other mitigations may be necessary as this notion of build back better starts to take provenance more widely. And those will be considerations outside of this. This deals with the personal cash flow for people at a really critical time. Support the motion. Anyone else wishing to speak? Councillor West, do you wish to close?
I think we've said it all. Thank you.
Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. And that brings us to the end of the business of the meeting today. Of the open meeting today, the ordinary meeting today, before we move into confidential, item 11, and I'll just introduce that we have 4 matters to go into confidential for. Item 11.1, the concerns Mount Alfred Rural Fire Brigade, which is closed under section 254J, 3, C and G. And I note that we considered a potential conflict for Councillor West with that matter and resolved that it does not exist. We have items 11.3, inappropriate conduct matter C20 00919 and C20 00870, closed under section 254J3F.
Sorry, Mayor, that was 11.2.
11.2, what did I say?
3.
Sorry, I apologise. 11.2. 11.3. Inappropriate conduct matter C21 closed under section 254J3F. And item 11.4, inappropriate conduct matter C21 closed under section 254J3F. Also, I therefore seek a motion to move into closed meeting to consider those matters. Councillor Enright, move. Seek seconder. Councillor West. Wish to discuss further? Sorry.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment to the moved and seconded motion.
Please let me hear it, councillor.
I move that in the public interest and the Local Government Act, that items 11.2 to 11.4 be dealt with in open council, and that the identification of persons apart from the subject of the complainant, in brackets, which is myself, not be named in deliberations. That's part 1. Part 2 will be that the letter from the Deputy Director of Department of Local Government dated the 13th of May 2021 to Council be tabled to the meeting.
Sorry, councillor, hard to accept something for tabling that I haven't seen.
Yes, I would.
The observation for all councillors.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the photocopiers are all down in the building. Not one of them is working at the moment. So in my attempt to get them copied for distribution, that can't be done at the moment. However, I can refer all councillors to the hub. The letter is from the Council and Executive Workshop of the 6th of October 2021, and it's from page 102. Everybody can access that to have a look at it. I suggest we have an adjournment for a period. I move another motion that we adjourn so that councillors can get access to that particular
Sorry,
document.
councillor, you don't need to move a motion. I can determine an adjournment. But I think just before we move to an adjournment, I would seek during that adjournment clarity of the notion of discussing those reports in public and tabling them in public without identifying individuals, because that's certainly recognition of the concern about certainly those reports about the health and well-being of people, is the concern about how moving that material into open as they exist today. I just seek guidance on how that exposure. I understand your amendment seeks to try to provide that protection, and I'm just not quite sure whether that's possible. So I'd like that process checked.
Mr. Mayor, I'll also add to that amendment that the investigation reports not be made public.
Again, councillor, can we leave your proposed amendment just noted on the table whilst we investigate the practicalities of it in the context of the materials before the meeting as we move into an adjournment? Is that comfortable, councillors? We will adjourn. It's 10:30, so we will adjourn prior to returning to consider the amendment and the motion to move into closed, and we'll have a morning tea break whilst we're there. So we will return, stop looking at the clock on the wall, we will return at 10:55. Yeah. Welcome back, gallery. Apologies that we are a minute later than I had hoped for. A few discussions going on. So just returning from that adjournment, and for the clarity of those not with us in the room, Councillor Swamborough, having considered the content of your proposed amendment, I'm going to ask you to withdraw it momentarily. And the reason for that is that it's in conflict with the motion to move into closed, and it would be far better dealt with as a procedural motion prior to considering moving into closed. So as a first step to that, I would ask you to withdraw your proposed amendment for a moment to resubmit as a procedural motion.
Happy to withdraw.
Councillor, I think it was Councillor Enright who moved, and Councillor West who might have already seconded. Would you please be gracious enough to withdraw your motion to move into closed?
Yes, I would, thank you. Happy to withdraw.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Swamborough, I believe you have a procedural motion that you would like the meeting to consider. Would you please now table that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the procedural motion is the one that's just been withdrawn by myself, and I'll read it if you like. In the public interest and the Local Government Act, items 11.2, 11.3 and 11.4 of this agenda be dealt with in open session. And 2, the letter from the Deputy General of the Department of Local Government dated the 13th of May 2021 to Council be tabled to the meeting. And 3, that identification of persons apart from the subject of the complaint not be named in deliberations, and the investigation reports remain confidential.
Councillor, just before you formally move that, could I seek your indulgence that you refer to matter rather than complaint? because that's the language that it's referred back to it as, that they're referred back to us as matters.
When I say the subject of the complaints, I mean that's an identification of myself, not the matter.
Sorry, and just for clarity, Councillor, I'm not trying to be pedantic, but some matters there are matters that go forward as referrals that then are dealt with through a particular process. So that's why they're dealt with as a matter. So it is pedantic, it's about the language of it. And I know colloquially people refer to complaint, but the language, well, some may have been complaints, but certainly I know at least one of these was simply a referral. Councillor McGuinness.
Could I suggest that we just take those few words out and use the word complainant?
No, it's the subject of the complainant is the people where is the other parties is who you're trying to protect. The complainant would be one of those parties you're trying to protect. I think that's the intent, Councillor, is that correct?
So, Mr Mayor, in doing that, does that mean that I can't identify myself as the
No, Councillor. No, I'm just saying it's just the subject of the matter. The matter, I'm trying to create a point of alignment with the agenda item. The language of the agenda item is that it's an inappropriate conduct matter. That's the way it's referred back to council. I'm just simply trying to create alignment of language.
Okay, I'm happy with that.
So to convert, I think the word complaint to matter.
Matters.
Matters, sorry, yes. Now, can I just seek some procedural clarification? GM, Council Sustainability, have we been able to verify that the format of the report allows that to occur without breaching those thresholds of identity?
I believe so, Mr Mayor. And I do have John on the phone as well. John?
Principal Specialist.
Principal Specialist, Governance and Insurance. The main aspect there, obviously it's carried out in there, is that the investigation report, which are attachments to the matters, are kept in confidential because of that nature.
Okay, John, clearly John's not able to comment.
Sorry, Chair, can you hear me there?
Yes, we can. That mute button's tricky.
Yes, those council reports sufficiently protect the identity of the complainants and are okay to be published if need be.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, I think therefore Councillor Swamborough has proposed a motion, a procedural motion, which therefore doesn't need a seconder, but questions to the motion firstly for clarification. I have one question that I would put to the GM, Council Sustainability, with regard to the correspondence referenced at item 2. Has Council received further correspondence or further advice from the Department of Local Government, Department of State Development, Local Government and Infrastructure and Planning since that time, and or had confirmation from a legal perspective regarding the aspects of that letter pertaining to the matters before us today?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I guess, yeah, we're in constant consultation, obviously, with the department around this matter, and having had a chance to refresh my memory around what the correspondence pertained to were around matters of which, where the authors of the report were seeking consideration of a council in deliberating the matter in a closed session or not. since that correspondence, we have had further training from the department, as well as commitment from council that whilst our standing orders inadvertently include additional phrases, nowhere in our protocols or processes do we consider such considerations in determining the matter closed, and we strictly abide by what's in legislation. So legislation or the act simply trumps our standing orders anyways in that accord. There has been, I mean, obviously constant, and it's not just this council, but other councils, there has been certainly some interest around these matters. Earlier this week, we did field some queries around these natures, and certainly, again, out of abundance of care, we took it upon ourselves to seek clarity, for the author. It's always in the best interest of the author of the reports to maintain in accordance with legislation, but also to maintain they're following the right accords when it comes to interpreting what these matters relate to. And that advice brought back is ultimately it's up to council to decide. Again, it's up to councils to decide whether a matter is discussed and closed or not. Merely it's put in there by the author out of abundance of care again to stipulate around where these matters may or may not potentially have any impacts around the health and safety of any of the parties involved in the matter. Certainly I'm not a workplace health and safety or a medical practitioner to undertake whether or not one's health and safety can be impaired as a result of these matters being out in the open. Certainly open for guidance from others. However, out of abundance of care, as the authors of the reports, that's purely what we're trying to do. Is that we may be able to take one side of the matter's opinions on the matter, but however, you've got to take into account the other parties and where they stand on the matter being discussed in open. However, yes, we do have some further advice that in no way has the way that the report's been structured contrary to any legislation or the like. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's up to council to be understanding of the requirements and then take that into consideration when making a judgment call as to whether or not these matters are discussed in open or in closed.
Just a question.
Sorry, I just want to try to paraphrase that. Sorry, I haven't got my speaker on. Sorry, I'm speaking to that one. I can't start again. I'll forget where I was. So the simple version is we've had some advice that was positioned based on what a particular question asked. We've had some subsequent advice which has clarified it is okay to consider matters in a way that protects the identity of the parties who may have raised concerns and been involved in the matter, that any time we're discussing it, we need to give respect to dealing with those issues and therefore in our deliberations be very careful. Officers erred on the side of caution to deliver that protection the best way possible by listing these for confidential consideration. It's reasonably the responsibility of councillors to objectively consider how best to manage those protections with the transparency of process, which is why we're now dealing with this. Councillor Swamber, is there anything further?
Yeah, look, my question to the General Manager is the procedural motion that I've put forward, is that in accordance with what was recommended by the department in order to do exactly what the Mayor has just talked about, and that is protect the safety, you know, of the words in the Act are
Health and safety.
Adversely affect.
No, that's not on the
well,
legislation.
I tell you what, that's
health and safety.
that was the
That's the piece.
that was the advice that we got from the department subsequently, that our procedure was inconsistent with the words in the Act, in that we broadened health and safety to adversely affected. And of course, either way, the reason I put this forward is because if we adopt this procedural motion, we're doing everything the department suggested we should do in order to protect the health and safety and or adversely affected people in this particular matter. Now, I'm the one who's probably most adversely affected in this particular matter, and my view is that it's in the public interest for these matters to be put in the open session. So I don't believe my health and safety is going to be affected by this, and we're not going to mention who else is involved in our deliberations, or we're not going to release the confidential reports.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I guess in not going into a debate about the matter, I guess, yeah, I was there's no issues around items 1 and 2. I was more trying to clarify the correspondence and the purpose of the correspondence from the department, as Councillor Swamber indicated. One point in there was that we inadvertently utilised some additional wordings that were inconsistent with what the legislation prescribed, which we admitted, and we said, well, whilst that wording is included in there, you can see from this report that it still seeks consideration from council to discuss these matters under 254J3F, which still relates to the health and safety. So that's what the correspondence deals with, and whilst our standing orders makes reference to adversely, there's no referencing or inclusion of that word adversely in the reports whatsoever. It's always referencing to what's seeking to be consideration to be discussed and closed. And again, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's up to the council to take all these into account. One of the elements that's contained in the legal advice is with out of abundance of care is, for the debate or the discussions not to in any way potentially lead to the identification of the other parties, if that's the intent.
So thank you for that. So, Councillor, this is now sitting there as a procedural motion doesn't require a seconder as such. So we now have.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes, that's why I'm
the
clarifying.
secondary advice that we got from the department, was that in writing or just during the verbal?
That was actually provided in verbal on the day, but that's to the other point on the letter. So this correspondence table today makes references to 2 matters. 1, about that adversely. 2, it relates to seeking consideration from council to close under where the state or the other parties are involved. And then they made clarification that item 2, but they acknowledged council's 1 and that we don't use the term adversely.
Okay, thank you.
So further questions, firstly, Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted clarification as to the point 3 of the procedural motion that refers to the investigation reports remaining confidential. My question is probably to clarify what may become open and available to the general public, as opposed to what would remain confidential. So is it possible to get clarification of in reference to point 3, whether it's just the report, the council report, that would become open, and anything else that may be in that item that potentially could become available in open.
Just to point of clarity, the motion talks about the council report, and it refers, so we need to, what it refers to is that the investigation report, which is an attachment, and I believe it needs to, I think to your point, if you are looking at those matters, which we can't formally do publicly yet, there are a number of attachments which would reveal that go beyond the investigation report, which would also reveal, which I think is is that the matter you're trying to deal with?
It is, Mayor, that I don't believe that point 3 correctly clarifies which items would remain confidential. If we look at the report, there's 2 items that are attached, and I don't think we've properly addressed the second of the 2 items.
So I think that's a reasonable technical consideration. Councillor, would you?
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to amend that. I understand the point that's being raised, and I think that if I was to amend point 3 to any investigation reports that name individuals remain confidential. So then those attachments can be scrutinised, and if they fit that particular test, then they will not form part of the public record.
Could I suggest an addition to your wording, Councillor, that name individuals or could reasonably lead to the identification of such individuals?
Yeah, that's reasonable. Thank you.
And
identification of such individuals. Can you put the such in for me? It just feels like it's needed there as a clarity.
And Mayor, may I also ask the mover of the motion whether you would consider including the words after investigation reports and attachments and any attachments and any attachments.
Well, yeah, I thought that was what was implied.
So it's just for the benefit of the digital gallery, we have the complexity today that our wonderful support staff who are trying to capture all this in the minutes are doing so remotely as they need to operate remotely at this time, and are having to access through a secondary audio channel which isn't perhaps as clear as the one that the digital gallery is enjoying. So we're having sometimes to reiterate to ensure there is clarity and that we preserve the sanity and health and safety of that officer as well. Okay, anything further, Councillor Enright? Did you wish to?
No, thank you, Mayor. I think that clarifies that.
Any additional clarity required, councillors? Any additional discussion? Councillor Enright, sorry.
Mayor, could I ask the mover, Councillor Swanborough, what is the reason that you would like this to be moved from closed into open?
I think it's just, I think the procedural motion is is self-supporting. The two reasons are it's in the public interest, and the second one, it's in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government Act.
Before we move forward, I would just observe, councillors, this will make it a very constraining conversation for us, because even discussing the trigger events will be difficult, because that will immediately identify the parties involved. And so it will really limit the nature of what can be discussed in open, because it's that part 3 also is beholden on us to not reveal or discuss matters that could reasonably identify the individual. That's why officers erred on the side of putting these into a closed. So I just make that observation.
Mayor, can I ask a technical question, please?
Who to?
Probably to governance.
Okay, governance is all, the principal specialist governance and assurance is online. Hopefully speak close to the microphone for it.
Can I ask the question that, given that in item 5 this morning, we spoke about conflicts of interest, of which Councillor Swanborough outlined that he did have a conflict for items 11.2, 3 and 4. In view of that, is Councillor Swanborough able to raise a procedural motion in relevance to these items?
I don't know, GM, whether your principal specialist is...
I think John's there, but my understanding, and I'm certainly waiting for John to come online, but what we're discussing about the matter is about going into closed, not about the matters of the actual items. Yeah. So it's a motion that we discuss the matters in open rather than being in closed. Is the crux of the. However, John, are you able to provide further?
So just to try to convert that, this is a different matter to the contents of 11.2, 3 and 4.
Yeah.
That's and so if your question is, does the involvement in items 11.2, 3 and 4 create a sufficient weight of potential conflict to consider the other matter that we're dealing with now? Is that the essence of your question from a governance point of view?
Yes, correct, Mayor, it is.
There are two possibilities: that the principal specialist has lost connection, can't find the mute button, or is contemplating thoughtfully. That's 3. Yes.
Can you hear me there?
Yes, indeed. He found the button. Yes.
Technical difficulties. Yes, so the decision in relation to going into closed, as Oliver rightly put it, it's that decision is separate to the actual decision on inappropriate conduct. So there has been no conflict of interest raised in relation to anyone making a decision in relation to going into closed for this particular matter. So unless someone did raise a conflict, then at this stage there is none on the table.
Does that help you, Councillor?
Yes, thank you for that clarification.
Councillor
questioning.
I'm just going to actually reverse what Councillor Enroth just said. I'll just reverse what you just said, because it's interesting. If Councillor Swanborough has a conflict of interest regarding the information or the matter, if he was to move a motion to go into closed and not be open, so that no one was aware of the discussion, would that be, sorry to put this one in, but I mean, you've just said, no, there's no conflict because he's keeping it in open, but if he was going to closed, would there be a conflict of interest?
So I
No, but it
think-
goes back to, you can't say yes for one and no for the other.
So can we just pause for a moment and clarify? At present, we considered conflicts of interest in the context of the agenda as tabled without notification of any potential variations. We've reached a point in the meeting where we're now dealing with the procedural motion. And the procedural, the Councillor Enright's raised a question that I believe the clarification at the moment is, in the absence of anyone proposing a conflict of interest with the procedural motion, nobody has a conflict with the consideration of the procedural motion. That's the really clear, simple snapshot. Councillor McGuinness.
No, and I won't complicate it, but it's Councillor McConnell's point is hypothetical, number one, but it is something we should get advice on for a future date if that does arise.
I would hypothesise, and I'm not a lawyer, but I've spent a lot of time discussing these matters, and the message would be that conflict of interest would be based on the subject matter of the day, the context of the potential relationship to the matter for the individual on the day, and therefore there would never be a general notice. That's why conflict of interest laws are so confusing.
I think you're right, but yeah, I think it's good to get some. I think I am a lawyer sometime, but my son-in-law doesn't.
Certainly, it's one of those to come up in that further training that we have arranged for the future. However, in the interest of today, in the absence of anyone proposing that there's a conflict of interest, I'm progressing on with the consideration of a procedural motion, noting that those comments that it will be very constraining on what questions can be asked and what answers can be given to help the deliberations of council. And that will be dealt with have to be dealt with whoever's in the chair for which of the matters quite significantly. Okay, and also by the mindset of councillors to make that easier, please. Okay. We have a procedural motion put by Councillor Swanborough. Councillor, you wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the council wishes to treat matters such as inappropriate conduct complaints sensitively. However, one of the principles of the Local Government Act is transparent and effective processes and decision-making in the public interest. As such, these types of matters should, where appropriate, be considered in open session due to the strong public interest factors. The Council may consider inappropriate conduct referrals in closed session in circumstances where health and safety is directly affected. This provision of the local government regulation would only be exercised in extraordinary situations where the closure of the meeting is necessary to reduce the risk of or prevent a serious risk to the life, health, safety or welfare of an individual or individuals. Section 245J5 of the Local Government Regulation requires that the Council resolution to close a meeting must state the matter that is to be discussed and include an overview of what is to be discussed where the meeting is closed. That's the reason why I'm proposing this amendment, and every word.
Point of order, Councillor. You're actually proposing
the resolution motion. Yeah, it's a procedural motion. Sorry. That's the reason I'm proposing this procedural motion. And those words I just read out to you come directly from Natalie Wild, the Deputy Director General of Local Government. So there is a test in here about the seriousness of the matter. And that is what Council needs to turn their minds to, is the seriousness of the matter. And that's clearly what's being outlined to us in the letter that's being tabled today.
You wish to speak against the motion?
Probably do. No. Could I request that Councillor Swanborough reads out the motion? because there's been a number of changes there for the gallery. I don't believe we've chopped and changed a number of words.
I'm happy for it to be read.
Okay, I'll read it again. The new amended motion. Number 1, in the public interest and the Local Government Act, items 11.2, 11.3 and 11.4 be dealt with in open session. 2, the letter from the Deputy Director General of the Department of Local Government dated 13th of May 21 to Council be tabled to the meeting. And 3, the identification of persons apart from the subject of the matters not be named in deliberations, and any investigation reports and any attachments that name individuals or could reasonably lead to the identification of such individuals remain confidential.
Do you wish to speak?
No, I'm right. I think it's just to make it clearer for everyone.
Councillors, I will speak against the motion. And the reason is, in the past, there have been matters which are referred to in reports today where I have been by virtue of my legislated obligation, the person who referred matters. Those matters were resolved by councillors without me in the room. However, I became the public target of retribution and vilification through particular media outlets that caused, for me, psychological distress, and for my family, psychological distress also. Now, it's easy to abdicate and say, oh, we can't control what the media does. And certainly I acknowledge that. However, what we feed to the media and what we make visible for the media to interpret or misinterpret creates a platform for abuse. And where that potentially involves, it's bad enough when someone is fulfilling a legislative obligation, but where someone's actually trying to ensure a safe workplace, they're almost in the category of whistleblower, and we need to ensure we give them proper and complete protections at every turn in our deliberations. That's my concern with the risk in this approach today. Those requests for workplace health and safety protections are not lightly made. Anyone else wishing to speak for the motion?
I'll speak for the motion. Speak for the motion, and I take your points on board, Mayor, and I think it behoves us all when discussing this that we be very, very careful in what we do say, and a slip of the tongue could be detrimental to some individuals, and people will always interpret their own spin and view on things, what we say, but we just have to be careful. But I think it's in the interest of, in the public interest, that we actually do have this in open session.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak against the motion? Councillor West.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'm unable to support this motion, and for me it is about the health and well-being of the other personnel involved, and I'm sure, as Councillor McInnes just mentioned, it will be that slip of the tongue which may reveal the personnel who are involved, and I don't believe it's fair to them. I totally understand that we need to have as much open as we possibly can, and I understand that for the community, but the information, the letters, the correspondence that come to all of us from the Office of the Independent Assessor are always private and confidential, and I see this as being pretty much the same.
Anyone else wishing to speak for the motion? Councillor McConnell.
Yeah, I'll speak for the motion, please, Mr. Mayor. I think it's beholden on all of us to be open and transparent as per our charter. The letter from the department was fairly outright that this sort of stuff should be in open session. I'm pretty sure we're all adult enough to watch what we say and keep names out of it. But I do believe that any of this should be done in open. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to speak against the motion? Councillor North.
Thank you, Mayor. I would certainly speak against this motion, not in the way of providing transparency, but more in about protection of our people. And I don't see that there's any benefit for the public interest. In fact, I think Councillor Swanborough is probably looking for his own benefit that might come out of this. And my fellow councillors, I think we need to be very, very cautious about progressing anything that involves a third party in providing any opportunity for impact on our people. We don't have to open a paper or open a news article or listen to the news about impacts of mental health. By allowing the opportunity for the items to be serious items to be discussed in these 3 items that may have any concerns that impact on a third party is a responsibility that we will have to carry. I don't believe that it will allow us to have a full and frank discussion without the risks of identifying a third party. And I ask my fellow councillors to be very cautious about how you vote on this amendment. I think we're entering into procedural motion. We're entering into very dangerous territory that could have ramifications well beyond what we can imagine. And I would encourage you to not support this procedural motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone wishing to speak additionally for the motion? Wish to close, Councillor Swanborough.
Mr Mayor, I think the discussion's gone on long enough. It is a provision of the Act. Our legislators were pretty mindful of everything when they passed this legislation. It was passed as a result of Belcara legislation. This is about open and transparency because the public have a right to know how their councillors are behaving, and also they have a right to know what the allegations are and what the results are of those investigations in this matter. And I think that all this does is says that Scenic Rim Council will comply with the state's legislation in relation to this matter. The issue of seriousness needs to be taken into consideration, as the letter from Deputy Director General says. It has to be pretty serious, you know, to fall within that category. And there is an expectation, I think, that they would expect that there would be times when all the complainants are not the complainants, but affected people may be named. I mean, I consistently read what happens at the Gold Coast City Council, where all of these things are done in open session, and it's an open book. Yeah, everything is revealed, and they understand that's the way it's supposed to happen, as do many other local councils. And I think it's a bit unique that Scenic Rim Council would be one of the few people who take this view that it has to be all done in confidential.
Put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? The motion's carried. Division noted. Divisions 1, 2, 5 and 6 in favour. Those against, Mayor Division 3 and 4. We will now turn our attention to item 11.2. These now need to be considered in open.
Oh, we haven't done 11.1 yet.
Yeah, but 11.1 has to be dealt with in confidential, in closed. So you can return some other time. We need to move into closed to deal with that. So we should deal with all of the open matters first. Okay, I think I'm right. So, councillors, turn to the matters in the confidential agenda. to item 11.2. And I'll ask for this to be introduced by the GM.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 11.2 relates to whereby the Office of the Independent Assessor referred two complaints of inappropriate councillor conduct to council with the recommendation to engage an external investigator to follow through. The necessary process was undertaken prior to that in terms of consultation with the unaffected balance councillors, and Ashdale Investigations were tasked with undertaking the investigation. This report outlines the necessary details without going into too much detail around the nature of the alleged complaints and the necessary findings. If it's okay, Mr. Mayor, I will refer to the Principal Specialist Governance Assurance, who, in order to maintain arm's length, he undertakes the necessary consultation with the external investigators to allow the relevant process to be undertaken in full accord. John, if you could introduce the report and the outlining concerns.
Thank you, Oliver, and I might just, for clarity for the members of the community that are listening, just explain the process that is going to be followed here in relation to these matters. So the councillor subject to the allegation will remain in the meeting and can be present to listen to the debate and to answer questions put through the chair from the unaffected councillors to assist them with their decision on this matter. Once that is concluded, then the subject councillor must leave the meeting whilst councillors vote on the conduct and determine any order that's necessary. Once that occurs, then the subject councillor can return back into the meeting, and then the chair will advise the subject councillor of the decision. What I'll do for each matter is read out the allegations and then hand over to councillors to deliberate on the matter. So the first one for C20-00870 and C20-00919. The allegation is that on the 27th of November 2020 and 11 December 2020, complaints were made to the Office of the Independent Assessor about the conduct of Councillor Swanborough. The complaints related to similar conduct where it was alleged that the councillor breached the Code of Conduct for councils in Queensland in his behaviour towards a council employee that occurred during council meetings and via email. I'll just point out that the investigator established that the alleged conduct in a council meeting is not inappropriate conduct and should ordinarily be dealt with in a meeting. So the investigation focused on the allegations of what was contained in emails. Chair, can I just get confirmation that you can hear me on my remote link?
Loud and clear, thank you.
Okay, so as Oliver pointed out, the Office of the Independent Assessor, Independent Assessor conducted an assessment and they've referred the matter back to council to determine or to conduct an investigation to determine the matter. An external investigation was conducted and a report provided to council, and now council's investigation policy requires council to consider the findings and recommendations in the report and determine whether the councillor has engaged in inappropriate conduct, and if so, what order might be imposed. So I'll now hand it over to the councillors to deal with this matter.
Thank you, Principal Specialist. Councillors, firstly, any questions or clarification to the process? Yes, Councillor McConnell.
Just a quick one, Mr Mayor. The first one we're dealing with complaints, sorry, as detailed, which was
C20000919.
870 and 919.
Yes.
They relate to the same issue, but two separate complaints.
But they've been dealt with as one matter.
Correct. But both complaints are the same issue. Yeah. Okay. The investigation report only states the 22nd of November, not the 11th. So the 11th of December complaint is exactly the same as, so both complaints are the same, exactly the same.
Councillor, I'm not sure anyone here, and maybe the principal specialist can, but the information you have in front of you is the information we have to rely upon, which is the information provided by the OIA to council through the principal specialist for the management and allocation under advisement from councillors, remember?
Yes, yeah.
That this has gone to the independent investigator. So the matter as it's tabled is what we have to deal with. I'm not sure whether the principal specialist can add any further clarity.
Mr Mayor, I can add some clarity.
Touching on what I said earlier on was that the investigator recognised that some of the complaint related to conduct in a council meeting, an ordinary meeting, and that conduct under the Local Government Act is not classed as inappropriate conduct. It's unsuitable meeting conduct, which is dealt with separately. So what the investigator has found, which I agree with, is that meeting conduct at an ordinary meeting, the conduct of councillors, it can't be held to be inappropriate conduct under this process. So that may well be why there's two reference numbers, two complaints, but predominantly one of those complaints related to conduct inside an ordinary meeting.
And we don't know which is which?
I'm not sure the purpose for the question, Councillor, in terms of the matter that the OIA has identified has materiality to investigate is what they've referred back.
Yep.
And what the investigators focused on. If you're seeking clarity about the administrative trail, I'm not sure we can answer that today.
Well, we have two complaints that we have to deal with.
No, you have two separate matters. You have three matters to deal with today.
Sorry, no, we're just dealing with 11.2 now.
Yeah,
So
11.2, you're dealing with one matter.
That's the email.
Yeah,
that's so again, Councillor, that's what the report identified. Again, this is the problem. I'm trying to be very careful.
yeah, I know, so am I. I'm just, we've got two complaints on
on
the report.
Through you, Chair, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there are. Let's break this down in simple terms. There were two allegations that were being followed up by the OIA, and that was referred to council to investigate. One of those matters in this thing, in this report, was around meeting conduct, which the investigator didn't pursue or follow up because that doesn't align to inappropriate. So what we're talking about is inappropriate conduct. So that was never followed through. So it was recognised, but it should have been dealt with at the meeting through appropriate meeting conduct. So the only other item that was on there was around that particular, and it pertained to an email without going into further detail.
So we don't have to deal with the meeting conduct.
No, Councillor. No, Councillor. For clarity, the report.
That's right. I'm just.
No.
But so what we're dealing with are two complaints.
So we don't control the communication of the OIA.
Yep, agree.
Okay, so they received matters referred by whatever mechanism, they assessed them and provided advice back to council, which saw these two. I won't suppose, but a reasonable person might conclude that they related to the same particular focus of matters and events, that they overlapped in some way. They've identified that some components are dealt with through other processes already, and they focused their guidance to council about what needed to be investigated through the principal specialist. That's been dealt with through an investigator, which has provided a report. And we're here to consider that report and the council report of the matter, but also then the contents of the investigator's report in assessing this matter today.
Okay, thank you.
That's from a procedural point of view. Anything else on the procedural component of this? Now, whilst we're dealing with this matter, Councillor Swan was able to remain in the room and answer questions. If you wish to ask questions, just let me know so that we can clarify those questions. But Councillor, you have a further procedure?
Mr Mayor, the nature of this complaint comes back to an email, the words of an email that I sent.
Councillor, sorry, you don't get to, if you want to ask a procedural...
I'm asking a question because...
Well, don't talk about the content of the investigation, because now otherwise you could be seen to be trying to influence beyond answering a question from the room. I'm just looking at
Mr Mayor, the investigation report says that I can provide statements, I can defend myself,
sorry,
I can ask questions, I can do all those things.
No, sorry, Councillor.
In this meeting.
No, Councillor. You can answer questions put through the chair to assist. I'm just straight out of standing orders, Councillor. You can answer questions to assist.
It's in the investigation policy.
Sorry, Councillor. I'm quoting standing orders. This isn't an investigation. The investigation's complete. The investigation has been done, and I believe you, from reading the report, you've had opportunity to answer questions that were dealt with in the investigation. I'm referring to standing orders, Councillor.
Yes, I would like the governance manager to advise me what rights I have in this particular meeting today. Thank you.
Principal Specialist, if we can just get our names right, Councillor, Principal Specialist Governance and Assurance, then the right person will know who you're talking to.
Thank you.
And Councillor, I would...
Yes, thank you, Councillor. If we go just by the standing orders, which governs the conduct of the meeting, then that is correct under section 7, is that the subject councillor can remain in the meeting, to be present, to listen in on the debate, and then to remain to answer any questions put through by councillors through the chair to the subject councillor. So if the investigation policy is in conflict to that, then I would suggest we'd be going with the standing orders, but I'll have to look up the policy, the investigation policy, and get back to you on that to see which section you're referring to.
And just councillors, on page 9 of what was the original confidential agenda report, it transposes a section out of standing orders. And I'll read it in full just to help with the clarity of what I've been referring to. The subject councillor has a declarable conflict of interest and is permitted to remain in the meeting during the debate and answer questions put through the chairperson to assist the other councillors in making a decision. The subject councillor must leave the meeting during the vote on whether they have engaged in inappropriate conduct and for the determination of any penalty to be imposed. Now that's a paraphrase. There's a bit more wording around that in the standing orders, 7.2. Does that provide sufficient clarity to that procedural aspect? I'll take silence as...
No, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, the investigation policy talks about procedural fairness, and it says that a councillor can make a statement to the meeting in relation to the allegations that have been made. That's what I'm referring to.
Well, councillor, that doesn't rest inside standing orders, and I believe that investigation policy also, I would need to adjourn the meeting to look at it in the context of using an independent investigator, which is now the protocol, and how that overlaps with investigation policy. Because a reasonable person might conclude that you've had opportunity to provide those statements to the investigator for inclusion in the report, for clarification to matters that were part of the holistic consideration of the investigator in formulating their outcomes from that investigation. So if you wish to pursue that, I will be adjourning the meeting to seek clarity around the interaction between the investigation report and standing orders, because standing orders have been quite clear, and if your argument holds true, then there are other parties who've been denied that opportunity in the past that may open up a whole range of aspects. So
I think now's the time to adjourn the meeting. This is an important matter and needs to be sorted out.
I am happy to adjourn the meeting, and I will then ask for the GM, the CEO, and GM Council Sustainability, and the Principal Specialist Governance and Assurance to reflect on the perceived conflict between the directions of the standing orders, which are often quoted in here as the only reputable source, and other matters, and how to properly intercede between them, given that since the investigation report was introduced, I suspect the actions of the OIA have overtaken some of those steps. But adjourning now. Gallery, I'm sorry, I cannot tell you at what time they're likely to return. But we'll try to endeavour to return on the half-hour window. So listen again at 12:30 and again at 1, and we'll return on one of those time markers. Welcome back, councillors, executive, and those in the digital gallery. We have had some considerations and deliberations, and I believe, if I seek guidance and confirmation from either the GM or the principal specialist, that we've clarified those points of confusion and are now able to proceed on the basis of standing orders.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I believe we have provided the necessary documentation to Councillor Swanman to see whether or not there was identification, but may just led to confusing a couple of the subject matters together. But I believe that's the case.
Councillor McConnell, you had further?
Yeah, if I could just move a procedural motion, please, Mr. Mayor.
Tell me more, councillor.
Given the nature of the conversation that's been going on in regards to confidentiality of council officers or anyone involved in this, I'd like to defer items 11.2, 11.3 and 11.4 and seek advice from the Department of State Development, Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning on the appropriateness of being in open or closed session for inappropriate behaviour considerations. I think.
So that's your procedural motion, councillor. So before you, I guess, speak to, I understand the wording. I thought we already had that guidance.
Well, we were given guidance on the 13th of May last year that we haven't received written back from the state government, from the department. There was that training on the 14th of December, but there was no written advice to that. We do have advice from our own lawyers saying to ignore, I think, basically ignore what the state says and being closed. We've got people saying that the Gold Coast City Council do everything in open and there's no restriction on what's said within their meeting in regards to inappropriate conduct. I think we just need to clarify which direction we need to go, and I think advice from the state government is needed to provide some guidance on how we go. I mean, the 13th of May letter was pretty succinct, and is that everything should be out in the open. And then our advice was different from our legal, and I just don't want to be in the boat where someone accidentally or inadvertently give something out that someone else believes shouldn't be given out and put it under the guise of health and safety. So I just think we need to get some proper guidance. If the state government come back and say, no, you need to be enclosed, we'll be enclosed. And if they come back and say, no, we need to be in open, then we need to be in open.
Sorry, but Council, I understand the argument you're putting, and I certainly want that clarity, and thought we had that even in the correspondence from the department, which was tabled today, asked to be tabled today and moved by resolution to do so, that it actually refers to I guess it's the materiality of risk.
Correct.
And the challenge is, I think the challenge, this notion of seriousness, is when you get into mental health and well-being, it's difficult for you to judge that, and duty of care says you have to err on the side of caution. But I'll ask the GM if there's any additional, or if he defers to principal specialist.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'm not going to paraphrase any of that what was said there, but I guess ultimately, at the end of the day, what the department always says, it's up to the council to determine whether the matters go in open or closed. I don't believe they'll give us a piece of advice specifically say all these matters should be discussed in open. The procedure is stipulated in the legislation. I believe that there's some correct obvious. There's some cautious procedure that needs to be considered in terms of not relating or not referencing to the investigation report, which, as per our investigation policy, the report is confidential in nature. However, talking about the matter in open is allowable, and obviously that's what council on this particular matter have resolved, to discuss these matters in open. I'm not sure how the department's going to provide guidance around not overstepping or being cautious around not the risk of inadvertently releasing information that could expose or identify other parties outside of that's in that complaint or in that alleged complaint matter.
So, look, thank you for that clarification, but any further questions, clarification either from the officer or from Councillor McConnell?
Yes.
Yes, Councillor McGuinness.
Mayor, just ask the officers, either one, is there a great urgency that this has to be done today?
I don't believe so, Councillor McInnes, but because John obviously has succinct knowledge or understanding of these. John, are you able to provide whether there's a urgency or a time-driven date for these to be action today, or?
Yes, thanks, Alderman. Thank you, Councillor. no, there's no specific time limitation on when these need to be done, other than we'd always want to do things as efficiently as we can and get them resolved as quickly as possible. But yeah, there's no particular date that's critical or anything like that.
Thank you. Any further clarifications? Any further clarifications, councillors? No. Any procedural motion? So, councillor, you wish to speak to your motion?
Just to seek guidance, should we include and legal advice on the end? Is that something that we will need to do, or is that something that will come from the advice from government, state government?
Through you, Chair, I believe the guidance will be enough to warrant that. And
Okay.
I will also, just to point of clarity around the reference before that the previous legal advice ignoring the department, that's probably, I'm not sure what context of that, but that wasn't something that we sort of indicated. The legal opinion is always, legal advice is always an opinion. It's to be considered by council, and then council undertakes whether they make a decision. They're never to make state or clear that, ignore what the department or the legislation say. They just sort of
Probably
put
a
that
misspeak by me.
Just want to make sure, just in case they're listening.
So do you want me to just read out the procedural motion?
Yes, please, councillor. You wish to speak, or you wish to speak to it further?
No, I think it's pretty self-evident at this stage.
Okay, read it out again then.
Okay, given the nature of conversation in regards to confidentiality of council officers or anyone involved, that items 11.2, 11.3 and 11.4 be deferred, and council seek guidance from the Department of State Development, Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning. In regards to the confidentiality of council officers.
Mr. Mayor, just a query there, just if I could.
Yes.
Yeah.
Council has resolved to bring 11.2, 3 and 4 into open. So if the advice then came back that potentially that's not the correct process in relation to these items, where does council stand there? Should council give some consideration to not bringing those forward for the purposes of the minutes? Perhaps governance, John, you might have a comment on that too.
So I'm just going to pause there. We've already made that determination, so we can't unpack that one without going back and having a good reason to overturn that. However, the information received from the relevant guidance, and I think there's still some wording perhaps I'd suggest to play with, may lead us to conclude a different way of progressing those matters at a future date. So I'm not sure we can, perhaps the only addition, councillor, perhaps in light of that comment to consider for your procedural motion would be whether to seek the support of council to withhold adding the details reports for items 11.2, 3 and 4 to the minutes, into the public record until such time as this clarity is resolved.
Would not that happen because we defer it?
Well, no, because we've brought them forward. They would now appear unless we resolve to hold them for a future date until this matter is clarified.
So put that in point 2.
If you would like to.
Sharon, point 1 will be the first one. Point 2.
Yeah,
sorry, Sharon, the first one will be point 1. So given point 1, point 2 will be that that the council reports remain.
Could I perhaps assist with the wording, Councillor? Suggest, Sharon, something to the effect that the reports pertaining, council report, the reports pertaining to items 11.2, 11.3 and 11.4 remain confidential until such time as council is able to consider the results of part 1 of this procedural motion.
I'm happy with that.
Does that make sense? I'm trying to say it in simple terms.
Mr. Mayor, just in terms of the wording there, just to follow the standing orders, the deferred should say deferred to a future meeting. Just
okay, thank you. Yes. So it be deferred to a future meeting. Councillor McInnes.
Coming from a position of ignorance on it, but can't we rescind a motion with the approval of the first, the mover and the seconder at any stage? And I think it's good wording that's there now. Yeah.
Are you referring to rescinding the original motion from Councillor Swanborough? Well, there was only a mover, not a seconder, but it's the beauty of procedural motion.
But the council would have to approve, of course.
Because we have gone through the voting process. So before, when we stepped back, we only had motions and amendments sitting on the table without having voted on them. Because we have now reached a point of having completed deliberations of the matter, it is more complex for us to go back and rescind. We have to go through a notification period and a process to rescind.
But if the majority of councillors think that is a way to go,
we would have to go through a time period to rescind.
So that's fair enough too.
That's okay.
No, it's just the point I'm making is that it is in contradiction to the motion earlier today, and it wouldn't be an amendment, couldn't be an amendment in my opinion, but
and that's why I think this. This fits, I think, with the intent of what Councillor McConnell's seeking, is that we basically freeze where we are.
Correct.
Through you, Chair, I guess the only other one is I picked up the point before, but by adding additional reference to the legal aspect, was that still? I think it's just said that from the department, but.
Sorry, just to clarify, I think I'm trying to pick up the piece of the conversation here. I think, Councillor, this is the reference back to in part 1. Council seek guidance. I think you're talking about from the
and that's what I said.
From the
didn't you say we didn't need it?
And so you're suggesting that would the councillor consider in his motion, before he moves it, to include appropriate legal advice?
Yeah, I would, at the end of 1, Department and Planning, and appropriate legal advice from councils.
Well, I think appropriate legal advice.
Yeah, and appropriate legal advice.
And if that comes in direct opposition to the advice from the government? It's only advice, I know, but you...
I'm quite confident it won't be from the most recent contextual conversations with both of them, but yeah, then we'll deal with that on the day. Councillor, this is your procedural motion still, so before we move forward, are you comfortable with those words?
Yeah, I'll just read it out for the benefit of the public. That 1, given the nature of conversation in regards to the confidentiality of council officers or anyone involved, that items 11.1, 11.3, correction, 11.2, 11.3 and 11.4 be deferred to a future meeting, and council seek guidance from the Department of State Development, Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning and appropriate legal advice. And 2, the reports pertaining to items 11.2, 11.3 and 11.4 remain confidential until such time as council is able to consider the results of part 1 of this procedural motion. I'm happy with that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. You wish to speak to any questions?
Mayor, can I just clarify? I think it's the Department of Local Government, Racing and Multicultural Affairs.
No, it's changed.
No?
No. Yeah, they've changed.
Oh. Right, okay. My apologies.
So that's next week.
But good attention to detail. Okay. Councillor?
No, I think we've had enough discussion from me, Mr Mayor.
Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak additionally? We put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? Why not, Councillor?
Because of conflict of interest.
No, this isn't dealing with the content of the matter. This is a procedural motion. This is a procedural motion, Councillor, similar to your procedural motion.
Procedural motion in relation to this matter.
No. So again, just for the benefit of the gallery, Councillor Swanborough withheld from the vote, believing this to be part of the consideration of item 11.2, but in actual fact, this is a procedural motion pertaining to the process of managing 11.2, 11.3 and 11.4, and therefore is not dealing with the specific content of it. So I will just recall the vote on the procedural motion. And those in favour? And that is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. I hope gallery understands the intent in trying to bring that transparency to what was occurring. On that basis then, I do now seek a motion to move into closed session. If you're quick again, Councillor Enright. No? Councillor McGuinness beat you. Seconded Councillor West. I don't think this needs discussion, councillors, unless someone violently believes so. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. To those in the gallery, thank you for your endurance with us today, working through a few complexities. And we're now going to move into closed session. And I'm going to be really brave and anticipate that we will be back I'm going to say 1:35. I'm going to allow time to go through any questions. Okay, thank you. Thank you, councillors. I seek a motion to return to open meeting to Councillor McConnell, seconded Councillor Chalk. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Councillors, we have a recommendation before us in 3 parts. I ask the GM as an environmental sustainability to introduce this for us.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation for this item is that 1, Council acknowledge the purchase of land by the Queensland Government's former Public Safety Business Agency on behalf of Queensland Fire and Emergency Services for the purpose of a new rural fire brigade premises upon a site described as Lot 7 on SP 313702. And the 2, Council enter into an agreement with the Mount Alfred Rural Fire Brigade for the provision of a financial contribution for the purposes of construction of a new fire brigade premises situated at Lot 7 on SP 313702 on the basis that the Mount Alfred Rural Fire Brigade vacates the existing premises situated at Lot 3 RP 893142 without removal of any fixtures such as the existing shed and all other infrastructure. And 3, in accordance with clause 22.6.3 of the Scenic Rim Regional Council Standing Orders Procedures CM03 .01 Council maintain confidentiality over the content of this report due to the local government's budget and negotiations relating to a commercial nature.
I seek a mover, Councillor Chalk. Any additional questions, councillors? Any additional discussion? Seek a seconder, Councillor McGuinness. Speak to the motion, Councillor Chalk.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this is a great result, I think. I congratulate council officers who are working through this. It was a bit of a prickly one, I think, but we've got through the end, and this is going to be very pleasing for that organisation and the wider community out in that area, as they play a vital role in the fire area right through the border ranges on that western and southern side of our region. So I commend this motion for everybody to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak additionally? Put the motion. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, officers. That brings us to the close of the business of the ordinary meeting of the 22nd of March. And I therefore declare the meeting closed. Thank you to all involved. Good afternoon to those in the digital gallery.